All right. Hi, everybody. We're doing 6.4 now, the effects of government intervention in different market structures. So let's get right into it. Okay. So oftentimes when we're saying different market structures, the only time the government really needs to intervene in the markets is when there's an antitrust law. You already know price ceilings and price floors, where every once in a while they get involved in something else. But antitrust laws means we're trying to destroy what? You got it, monopolies. We're trying to get rid of it. So these are laws designed to prevent monopolies and promote competition. That's the idea. We currently have tons of antitrust laws on the books. It's the reason why when there's a big acquisition, it goes to the government to approve that acquisition. So if a major company buys another major company, the government will give the final say on whether or not the acquisition can happen. So monopolies are considered market failures. Here, let me get rid of this bottom box here. They're considered market failures because they destroy competition, so they're non-competitive, which is important. The government has to get involved as a result of that non-competition. So how do we regulate monopolies? Well, I just said we try to destroy monopolies with antitrust laws. Why would we regulate them instead? Well, sometimes it makes sense just to make a market efficient rather than destroying it altogether. We call those natural monopolies. So we do this to keep the prices low and to make them a little bit more efficient. We know this already. This is actually a review from last unit, right? You know this already. We do this through price ceilings, not taxes. Why don't we use taxes? Because taxes actually make the problem worse. When we tax a business, it shifts supply to the left. When supply shifts to the left, or when costs rise, marginal costs and average total costs go up, when that happens, it actually reduces quantity even more and increases price even more. And those are two things we're trying to fix, right? So we're trying to increase the quantity they're producing and decrease the price. So a tax does the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. We have a couple of options here. We can do a price at the socially optimal price, which is where price equals MC, or in other words, where demand equals supply. That's allocative efficiency. We'll show that to you in a second. Or we can do a fair return price, which is where price is equal to average total cost, which gives a total revenue equals total cost and economic profit of zero. We call this fair return. It's normally the better scenario because if I did a socially optimal, that firm is going to exist at a loss and the government will have to subsidize to keep them in around, right? So that they don't go under. So the only time that we are going to regulate is when it's a natural monopoly. We're not going to regulate monopolies that are just normal monopolies. We're going to subject them to antitrust laws and get rid of them, break them up, which we've done several times in the past. So here's an example of a natural monopoly. We know this is a natural monopoly for a couple of reasons. Just a quick review. Marginal cost is not a swooshie. Average total cost is not a bowl. Marginal cost intersects average total cost to the right of marginal cost and marginal revenue being equal, right? Or to the right of supply equals demand. In other words, we can produce a socially optimal amount. And when we produce the socially optimal amount right here, when we produce that, costs are still going down. So it's the lowest possible cost. In other words, we are going to be more efficient producing this ourselves because of our enormous economies of scale. Okay, so one firm can produce, there we go, just said that, at the lower price because of the economies of scale. Drop that down, the lowest cost. So it's better to have one firm because average total cost is falling at the socially optimal quantity. So we want to keep that natural monopoly around. Again, we've already talked about this, so I'm going to blaze through it. All right, so what happens if the government sets a price ceiling and get the socially optimal quantity? Well, what's going to happen is that there's going to have a loss. So before we do that, where is this firm going to produce without the government being involved? Where are they going to produce? They're going to produce where MR equals MC. That's their quantity right there. But they're not going to charge this low price. They're going to go all the way up here to demand, and they're going to charge this high price. We'll call this P2. So we're far, far away from the socially optimal amount where supply equals demand right here. We're not where we want to be. So if the government sets a price ceiling at the socially optimal price, then our total revenue is going to be price times quantity. It's going to be this box here. My total cost, I'll do this in red, is going to be up here. It's going to be that big old box. So we actually have perpetual losses here. Losses forever. That's the idea. Okay, so with those losses, we are going to experience it's persistent. It's not going to leave firms. Firms aren't going to leave, which recovers our losses because there's only one firm. So the government has to subsidize to fix that. So we are not normally going to use a price ceiling at the socially optimal quantity. So what else could we do? Well, we could do unregulated. We can also do a fair return versus socially optimal. A fair return would be setting the price at the point where it intersects demand. In other words, price is going to be equal to average total cost at this point. Where ATC intersects demand, my price times quantity, that's going to be my total revenue, and it's going to be my average total cost times quantity. Both of those are true. So as a result, we are going to have zero economic profit. Okay, let's keep going. Erase this. Let's try this out. We've done this already, so I'm going to have you pause it and try this question out. Unpause. If the monopolist produces the allocative efficient level of output rather than the profit maximizing level of output, consumer surplus will. Well, first of all, their profit maximizing is going to be where MR equals MC, right here. The price is going to be right there. Consumer surplus is going to be this box right here, below demand, above price. Okay, so that's first. Second, if I'm doing socially optimal, it's going to be where demand equals supply. We know marginal cost is also supply. Let me change colors for this one. And so we're going to be right here at K. That's going to be my price. Right there is going to be P4, right? So now above price, below demand is going to be this big box right here. So the answer is going to be the area decreased by the area of P5JMP2. In other words, it used to be this, now it is this. There you go. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, I already gave you the answer to that one. All right, let's look at why. Which of the following is a government policy that is intended to address a market failure? Okay, it's intended to address a market failure. Taxing the use of toxic pesticides. That's actually from a previous unit, so sorry about that. Botching this right now. That's for externalities, right? If I tax the use of a toxic pesticide, that is me saying this is a negative externality. I need to fix it by taxing it per unit tax, shifting it to the left. All right, primary purpose of antitrust laws is to pause, unpause. Correct answer is C, prevent firms from monopolizing trade and to promote competition. That's why we have antitrust laws to begin with. It's anti-monopoly. Antitrust is anti-monopoly. Pause. Unpause. Most economists argue that a monopoly is inefficient because it, B, I missed it, produces too little output and sets the price too high. Too little produce, too high of a price. We've talked about that a few times. That's your answer. All right, a quick side thing, something in addition to know, is that the reason why we do a per unit tax versus a fixed tax. So keep in mind that supply is always going to be the marginal cost above average variable cost. We talked about that in a previous unit, but just keep that in mind. I call it a sneaky supply. You don't really have to know that's just above average variable cost, but we can talk about that more in the future. So a variable cost increase, or in other words, if I have a per unit tax, what's going to happen? If I have a per unit tax, then my change in total cost is going to go up. My variable costs are going to rise because it's a per unit tax. It costs me more to produce more. And my marginal cost is going to rise. In other words, variable costs and marginal costs are both going to shift. A per unit tax actually impacts the quantity that I produce. That's really, really important. Per unit tax impacts the quantity I'm going to produce. So when MC increases, supply decreases. Okay, what if variable cost decreases? For example, I have a per unit subsidy. If it decreases, I have a per unit subsidy, then my marginal costs are going to go down. It's going to cost me less to produce more because my variable costs are going down. Remember, variable costs and marginal costs move together. The reason the total cost changes is because of variable costs. So it's important, per unit taxes, per unit subsidies will shift the marginal costs and will change quantity. This is why we use them to solve externalities. That's why we use a per unit tax to solve a negative externality, because it's going to shift the supply curve and change the quantity. That's why we use a per unit subsidies to fix a positive externality. It's going to provide a per unit subsidy and it will shift the demand curve to the right. All of that's very, very important. So when MC decreases, supply increases. Keep that in mind. All right, what happens if there's a fixed cost increase? So here we've got a perfectly competitive product market, marginal cost, average total cost. What's going to happen? Quantity is going to stay the same because when we do a fixed cost, or we call it a lump sum tax, it doesn't affect my marginal cost at all. My average total cost is going to change by the same amount, but marginal cost is not going to change. The change in total cost is going to be constant, which we talked about in previous units. So average fixed cost does not affect that. So here's the big takeaway. It's important. You're going to have maybe 1 or 2 questions on the AP exam about this. We use per unit rather than a lump sum tax because they impact the market differently. A per unit tax or a subsidy affects variable costs. Marginal cost, average variable cost, average total costs are all going to shift. And here's the important bit. This will affect the quantity that is produced. A lump sum tax or subsidy only affects fixed costs. It affects average fixed cost, average total cost. That's it. Marginal costs will stay the same. All that to say, this will not affect the quantity produced. So important. If they say, what's the difference between per unit and lump sum? The answer is per unit is going to affect how much I produce. If it goes up, I'm going to produce less. If it goes down, I'm going to produce more. Lump sum tax does not have an effect on that at all. A lump sum tax is designed to increase government revenue, but it doesn't manipulate the economy. Okay, here's a question about that. Pause. Unpause. The short-run supply curve for a firm in a perfectly competitive industry is E is correct. It's the marginal cost curve above the minimum point of the average variable cost curve. We just talked about that. I've only seen one question like this. It was from 2008, so you're probably not going to get a question like that. So shifting cost curves. Remember, a change in fixed cost changes average total cost, average fixed cost, but not marginal cost. So quantity is not going to change. A change in variable cost changes average total cost and average variable cost and marginal cost. As a result, quantity is going to change. Let's try this question out. If the current price for the perfectly competitive firm represented in Figure 1 is $10, what would be the result of an increase in fixed costs on the firm's profit, maximizing price and quantity? The answer is they're not going to change. A change in fixed costs is going to change average total cost, but it's not going to change my quantity and price, right? Marginal cost isn't changing. Mr. DARP isn't changing. So a change in fixed cost does not change output. Let's try this one. If one firm in a perfectly competitive industry experiences a technological breakthrough that lowers only that firm's cost of production, which of the following correctly describes the effect on this firm's price, quantity, and profit? The answer, of course, is that there's going to be no change in price, there's going to be an increase in quantity, and there's going to be an increase in profit. There's going to be no change in price because it's perfectly competitive. Price is constant. It's determined by the actual marketplace. But quantity and profit are going to change because it's going to be a variable cost that's going to decrease, right? As a result, marginal cost is going to change. When marginal cost changes, quantity and profit change as well. So when marginal cost goes down, we produce more, and we're going to have more profit as a result. That's it for 6.4. I hope that made some sense. See you later.